Hi and welcome to this Hangout. I am so excited today because we have a great topic for you and I have a great guest that's joining me all the way from the other side of the world. I'm in the UK and my guest is in Australia, I think. I hope. Yes, Australia.
Yes,
In the background you could hear there, Deborah was saying, yes, I am. Let me tell you a little bit about who my guest is and what we're going to be talking about today. I'm Carol Dodsley, for those of you who don't know me. And my guest is Debra Jarvis, and Debra is the author of the publication Good Feng Shui, and she graduated from the prestigious Western School of Feng Shui in San Diego in 2000. She's trained with Tara Collins, Karen Kingston, and Denise Lin. She's had multiple appearances on national television, been interviewed on radio, and written for and been written about in magazines and newspapers from Brisbane to Perth and everywhere in between as well. Internationally, Debra is recognised as Australia's leading real-world Feng Shui practitioner, and she's a strong advocate of the practical application of Feng Shui to Australian conditions while honouring the essence of its Eastern heritage, which I think is really great. She's sometimes referred to as the funky shoe lady, and we'll find out about that in a minute. And that's down to her penchant for great-looking shoes. But I'm going to ask her more about that. So let's say hello and welcome Debra Jarvis, who is Australia's most popular Feng Shui lady. Debra, hi.
Hello, Carol, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming. Now, we're going to talk about Feng Shui, but first I want to talk about the funky shoe lady. Tell me more about that.
Well, quite some years ago, I was approached about writing a children's book to get particularly young girls interested in Feng Shui and keeping their rooms clean and tidy. And we came up with the term funky shoe from that. So, and I haven't today, I hadn't even thought about that being in the introduction, but generally speaking, I have a pair of funky shoes that I can show off to you and show you just to have a bit of a play on that, rather than being extremely serious about our Feng Shui. So we like to have some fun with it as well. And what girl doesn't like to have some funky shoes in her wardrobe?
Yeah, absolutely. I have so many pairs of shoes. I don't wear most of them, but I have so many pairs of shoes. Now, today we're actually going to be talking about how to Feng Shui your office. But just start by telling me, how did you get interested in Feng Shui? I've looked at it for sort of on and off for years. And every time I picked up a book, until I got yours, I must add, I actually thought, this is just so confusing, because one minute it's telling me to do this in this corner of my room, and then I've got to find out which way my house is facing, and then I've got to do these measurements and all this stuff, and then that bit does that, and I'm not sure if it's by room or by house, and I just, every time I got so confused. And I know that a lot of people really love Feng Shui, and there's a lot of people who probably are like me, completely confused at times, but would like to know more. How did you get interested?
Okay, well, my story, Carol, is pretty similar to yours. I developed a bit of an interest in it. I was at a period of time in my life when my relationship wasn't going very well, and certainly finances could have been much better. And there's four main reasons people come to Feng Shui: relationships, finances, health, and whether they've got general life satisfaction. Often we can call that career. So I was no different to anyone else, and I read a few books, and I actually sat down one weekend and I worked out the auspicious and inauspicious directions for myself, my husband, and the house we were moving into. Now that took me quite some time, because as you've found yourself, those calculations are very complex, and every book you read says something different about it. Now what I came up with from that is that we needed something metal by the front door. Now we'd planned a holiday and we'd bought this house on the spur of the moment. So a week after we settled on the house, we actually were over in the States, and we spent some time in San Diego, and we also spent some time, I'm trying to think where, Las Vegas. And while we were there, we went looking for something metal to put by our front door, and they've got lots of fabulous sculptures of orcas and dolphins, but they're extremely large, extremely expensive, extremely heavy, and very expensive to ship. So needless to say, we came home without our hugely beautiful orca or any of the dolphins that we saw. And when we got back, one of the very first things that we did was we investigated putting some security screens on the windows and doors. And about 2 weeks after you put the security screen on the front door, I looked at my husband and I said to him, you know what, there's our something metal by the front door. And the reason from this weekend of calculations that I'd done that we needed something metal by the front door was for security and protection. Now, we'd been on this wild goose chase looking at, bronzed orcas and dolphins, and a security screen was such an obvious solution. I actually got quite disenchanted with Feng Shui at that point. Basically put the books in the corner and went, well, I don't want to do all this hard work to come up with what is basically a common sense answer. And it probably would have been a couple of years later that Tara Collins came out to Australia on a book tour, and she put Feng Shui in common sense language that I went, wow, I can really understand and relate to this. And within a couple of months I found myself travelling back to San Diego to do her practitioner training program, and that's how I really got started and involved in Feng Shui.
Cool. Just when you said that about metal at the front door, my brain immediately went, I tidied up downstairs in my front garden about a month ago, and my son brought 2 metal plant stands from the back garden and put them either side of the front door. But I had no idea about that metal at the front door, so it's quite strange, isn't it?
Well, it's not always going to be appropriate to have metal at the front door because it depends what direction it's in. So Feng Shui is quite multi-layered and quite multifaceted. And what I'd like to do is to start with the basics so that people can put those things in place without getting too much into the elements, because we want to start with that kind of clean slate and have the basics in place. And I hope that by the time you and I finish today, people have got some idea about that. And then if they want to know more about the elements and where are good and bad places for that, or they want to know about what's called the Bagua, which tells us where our prosperity sector is and where our health sector is, then they can get that information from either my book or many other good Feng Shui books around. But if we get the basic principles in place, sorry, I'm looking at you instead of the camera, so I'll try and look at the camera. I'm sure that's better for everybody out there. Then our lives work so much better. And the first thing that we want to do is we want to place ourselves in the power position. So essentially what we mean by that is we want to place ourselves where we've got a view out. So when you're looking into the camera, you can see where I am here, you'll see that I'm looking into where the opportunity is coming from. And I have a solid wall behind me so that no one can come up behind me with a bit of 4x2 and bop me over the back of the head. And that's the very first 2 principles of Feng Shui. And really, if that's all you get from our time together today, then that's a very valuable thing for you to have gotten. Because basically for the last, many thousands of years, we've been concerned about being attacked from behind. And all of a sudden, in the last 50 years, we've become all such nice people, no one's going to do any backstabbing anymore. Now, do you believe that? Does the audience believe it? Right? So, subconsciously, we still have that going on because our reptilian brain is programmed to protect us. So we always want to set ourselves up in a room first. So when we're setting up our offices, particularly for those working from home, we tend to sort of fit the furniture into the room and fit us wherever we fit in. And ideally what we want to do is we want to start with nothing in the room and put ourselves in the room first. And the way we would do that is we'd take a chair and we'd find out where the best, most comfortable spot to sit in the room is. And it's always going to be where we've got a wall behind us and where we've got a view of every entryway. We've got a view of the windows, we've got a view of the doors, so that we can see what's coming towards us. Now, there's 4 main parts to what I call the classic configuration. And the first is that we want to welcome opportunity to us. So we want to be in the pathway of where opportunity is coming. We want to direct it to us. And so if we're facing into a wall, can we see opportunity? If we've got any chance of noticing it?
As you're talking there, and I'm sort of sitting here thinking, now we had a chat last week about things, and I've started to move my office around because my desk was facing the wall with my back to the door and everywhere else. So I'm moving that around, so I'll be in that position when I'm on my desk. When I'm here in my studio, here where you can see the blue, this is a very big window, so I can turn my head very slightly to the side, I can see out of the window. My door is this side, it's not behind me, it's sort of almost level with me, but I am facing a wall because I have a wall there and a wall behind me. So am I in the wrong position for my studio? I mean, there's no way I could put them both side by side.
Yeah. How close are you to the wall, though? I mean, it's not right on top of you, is it? You're not sitting right up next to the wall.
No, my wall is probably about 6 or 7 foot away from me.
Yeah. So you've got a gap between you and where the wall is. So essentially you've got a solid wall behind you. No one can get there because they've got to come through the window or through the doorway, and you've got peripheral vision that's going to see either of those, right? And then you've got a space in front of you, so you're not right up next to the wall where all you can see is the wall, right?
Yeah.
So when often we'll put a desk so it's facing into a wall and it's jammed right on the wall, and we're sitting there and all we can see is the wall in front of us. We really haven't got much sense of what's going in the rest of the space. But where you are in your studio, you can actually, you've got a good arc of view, and you're not right on top of that wall, okay? It's not like it's, you know, only 2 feet away.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Now, what about people who, I remember one of my offices was a very long, narrow office, and I was straight against the wall, but I wasn't with my back to the door. Again, I had a window one side and a door the other side. But we see a lot of people that work from home who are in very small areas. What happens if it's not possible for them to position their desk across the room so that they've, or turn it round so that their back is against the wall and they're not right against the next wall? Is there anything they could do if they have to be in that position?
Yeah, excellent question, Carol. So the main thing that you can do is get a small mirror. So maybe about 2 inches in diameter, preferably round, and position it, not so you can see yourself, but so that you can see what's happening behind you. Right? Now, our older-fashioned computer screens were quite reflective. So we could actually see anybody behind us in those older-style computer screens. Our more modern screens don't do that. So a little round mirror is one thing that we can do. Another thing that we can do is have something that's in what we call a fire colour on the back of the chair. So that might be red, orange, or pink. And it might be just a jacket. I've had clients who've got a jacket that's too small, you know, a couple of sizes too small for them. They've taken that into the office and they've put that on the back of the chair. What we say is that no one's going to jump through fire to attack us. So the orange, pink, and red represent the fire element. They're giving us protection from behind. Now, I worked with an executive on a mining site a few years ago, and they got issued with orange regulation raincoats. And one of the directors that had come down from head office, because they had a lot of issues with the unions, was to be not confrontational. So they actually weren't permitted to have their desks in the power position in the room. So there would be 3 or 4 senior executives sharing a large office, and they'd be all placed around the walls, facing into the walls. And what this particular gentleman did is he took his regulation issue raincoat, and instead of hanging it on a hook, he put it on the back of his chair, so he had that protection from behind. Now, interestingly, he got promoted to the board within a very short time. So he got a promotion to oversee another site owned by the company in a different part of the country, and then from that he got up to that board level. So we really do want to protect ourselves in some way, and that can be a way of doing it where we can't actually turn the desk around.
Cool. And I think that's really useful for people to know, because that is one of the things, again, where sometimes you're reading a book or people are giving you information about how you can best create the right business environment at home, and people say, yeah, but I can't do that. Why did you specifically say a small mirror?
Okay, so sometimes, you know, if it makes sense in the place, in the space that you've got, and you can put a large mirror on the wall, go for it. But when we're looking for an energetic cure, a small mirror is going to give you enough of a reflection that you're going to see what's behind you without it maybe being inappropriate in the space. So Feng Shui is not about creating a space that looks odd or funny. We want to use the principles to create a space that's comfortable for us as human beings to spend time in and to be productive in that space.
Cool. So you don't have to do a small, but you can use a small if it is not practical or isn't going to look right to have a big one.
And the other thing is, if you have a big mirror on the wall in front of you that's looking behind, it can be distracting because most of us don't actually like looking at our own reflection all day long. So it's actually quite off-putting. It's nice to be able to glance in a mirror and make sure that, for us girls, that our lipstick's right and our hair's in the right places. But we don't really want to be having our own reflection coming back to us 8 hours a day.
Cool. So what else, we've talked about that power position, and it is really important not to be sat squashed facing the wall. If you do have to, then you can use colours, you can use a mirror. If you don't have to, then turn everything around and face outwards instead of facing inwards. What else is the basics?
Okay, so once we've done that, we want to put, as I said, the person and the desk in the room first, and then move the other furniture back in. Now, we only want to move the stuff back in that relates to the purpose of the office. And so often, particularly once again when people are working from home, there might be children's toys, or there might be a partner's sports gear. There might even be stuff of your own that you're keeping in the office because you don't know where else to put it. And particularly if we're operating a business, or especially if we're operating a business, we want that office to be reflective of the business. It's a place where we go to do work. It's not a place where we've got a lot of personal paraphernalia. Now, that's not to say that we can't have a nice picture on the wall, or a nice bunch of flowers, or a photograph of a loved one, but we have that in perspective. So, we might have maybe 3 items, such as what I've just described, but we don't want it to be crammed in with all of that personal paraphernalia. We want it to be reflective of the fact that we are in business, that it is an office, and that is the place that we're going to work. So we want to find homes for that other stuff somewhere else, so it's not in our office. And if we can't find homes for it somewhere else, we really want to question whether it's appropriate to keep that in our lives. So we say in Feng Shui that we want our environment to reflect who we are now and who we're becoming, not where we've come from. And if it is going to reflect where we've come from, do we want to recall that energy in our life? So I'm going to give an example. Here in Brisbane we have a number of Greek families, and the children will come out, and then a few years later they'll bring mum and dad out because they're aging and they want to care for them. They'll often be living in one room in the children's house, and if they're lucky they might have a nice granny flat with a bit of a kitchenette and a bathroom. And all too often they'll have pictures of all the good times they had with the people in the old country. And the problem with that is every time they see them, they remember how good life was back then, in the past, rather than living in the here and now, today, and enjoying what they have around them. So they're kind of harping back. And that can happen to us in our offices as well. We want it to reflect the business that we're looking to become, not maybe where we've come from. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. Something that was going through my head as you were saying that was, what about people who have no extra room? So it's not a room that is being used for the office. Yeah. For instance, I know when my children were smaller and I worked from home, I had no bedrooms that I could convert into an office. So I actually had one end of the sitting room. It was actually a living area with an office space. How would, obviously then you can't take all of your private stuff out because it's part of your house. How do people deal with that?
Yeah. So you take wherever the space is, and however big that is, and you designate what that space might be. Now, for some people it might be, they might actually have to sit up on the dining room table and they have to pack that away again. But it's about creating a space that is specifically there when you're working, so that you're telling your subconscious, okay, it's time to work now. I'm in business mode at this point. And if you've got to pack that away so that you can have dinner, for example, so you've got a very clear delineation between when it's a workspace and when it's a family space.
Yeah, and I think that's... Sorry, go on, carry on.
Like in your case where you've got the end of the room that you're using, then you have that just with the office stuff at that end of the room, and you'd have the other end as being a family space. So you wouldn't mix the two of them together. You'd have kind of a clear line. In fact, if you think about children, if they're sharing a room and one's really messy and the other's really tidy, and they might be tempted to put the tape down the middle of the room, we all laugh and say, oh, what a silly idea that is, but actually it's quite practical because it's clearly delineating and creating a boundary. And so we've talked, with the classic configuration, there's 4 parts to it. The first is welcoming opportunity in. So we want to make the office a space that we want to go to. The second is creating that protection. And the third is putting some boundaries in place. And we say when there's no boundaries in the physical, we have issues setting the boundaries with the people in our lives. So that's why we really want to be very clear about when it's an office and when it's not an office. Just another little story that comes to mind is that one of my teachers was telling us about a client of hers whose husband said to her, well, we can build you an office in the cupboard, in the wardrobe. And she had my teacher go out to do a consultation with her, and the husband really didn't want her business to succeed. It was like he was hiding it in the cupboard. And there was a perfectly good spare room that wasn't being used. It was for some children that lived across the other side of the country that, you know, might come every 2 years to stay in it for a week or two. And she wasn't allowed to use that room for an office space. So what she actually did was she could see the sense of, why should I be shutting a cupboard when I'm living here, or I'm in this space 365 days of the year, basically, just so that the children can have somewhere when they're there for just that 2 weeks, maybe every couple of years. So she took her stuff out of the cupboard and actually came out into the world, if you like. And surprisingly, business started to get some momentum. Now, her husband did work away. When he came back, he was quite horrified that she would have turned the space into an office. And they had quite a row about it. Now, he stomped out and left, and she was extremely upset about it. So one of the things when we practice Feng Shui is to think about, how do I really feel about this? And my teacher said to her, well, you know, how do you feel about it? And she said, well, actually it's a good thing because the relationship isn't that healthy anyway, and I certainly don't want to put the business back in the cupboard. So if that wasn't her response, she could go back to how things were by just turning the physical environment back into the way it was. But she made, in my opinion, a more empowered choice and said, you know what, this is better for me, for my business, for my life, so I'm going to move forward with this.
Yeah, and I think sometimes that is, you know, sometimes we do, and especially people that work from home, it's like that's an extra bit, not a very important bit. And I think you saying that story there is sort of reiterating, if you are in business, even if you know, and I say even, but if you work from home, because obviously if you go out to an office, you know where your office is, but if you're working from home, it isn't just a little bit on the side, unless it is a hobby business. It is actually part of your life, and you spend an awful lot of time working on your business or in your business. So it is important not to shut it away, not to feel uncomfortable, to enjoy the space that you have as well. And as you're saying, Deborah, to make that space conducive for business.
Yep. So you're going to be much more productive in a space that works for you and is specifically designated for the purpose for which it's intended. One of the other things that it can be good to be aware of is the different types of tasks in business. So if you're doing a lot of all of the jobs, so you're doing the bookkeeping and you're doing the marketing, and you might be a coach or a consultant, and so you're doing a lot of different tasks from the one space, is to somehow put some boundaries into place, either about when you're doing them or how things are set up to do those tasks, so that they're not all sitting around talking to you all the time saying, oh, I need to be done and I need to be done, so you're kind of a bit confused and so you can't focus on any of them. Have some boundaries so you can be very specific about what it is you're doing in a particular time, and have the stuff set up on the desk or wherever that is so you can do that job. So for example, you've got a separate space for your studio for when you're doing the Google Hangouts to when you might be doing some book work at a desk.
Yeah, exactly. It's it's the same room and right next door to each other, but two completely different environments. I would never sit on here and try and do work because it's just not conducive to it. I've got my keyboard on my lap and my mouse on my lap, and it just wouldn't work. But if I was and I used to do it, if when I sit on my desk chair to do a hangout that is a conversational hangout like we're having today, that feels too stiff to me. It feels too much like I'm in the office and this big black chair is behind my head. So I can really sort of understand what you're saying there about having the right environment and the right sort of setup that works for what you're doing. There's something else that I was thinking of when you were saying about if somebody was in, you know, I'm not in a mixed room anymore. This is my office room that I can do what I want in. But going back to if people are on the dining room table or in the corner of another room, and you were talking about the tape on the floor, would it be a good or a bad thing if somebody wanted to put, say, a curtain or, you know, like these stringy curtain things to actually give a real boundary, or would that block something?
No, I think that would be an awesome idea, because they're very clearly saying this side of the curtain is for this and this side of the curtain is for that. It needs to be something, though, that's aesthetically pleasing in the space, so it's not grating on them, so they need to like whatever it is that they're going to do that with.
Yeah. I mean,
another thing, if people have got their office as part of the bedroom, then you might, well, you would want to cover it when it's not in use. So a lot of single mums in particular that are in business, they haven't got the space, and their bedroom doubles as an office and an exercise equipment space and whatever else, to actually even get some drop sheets or that they can put over that so that it's not in their face when they're using the bedroom as a bedroom, which we want to be tranquil and peaceful and basically for sleeping.
That's a good thing to bring up, because there will, you know, there are a lot of people who use the bedroom and not the living area, so they're not coming out of their office at night, they're actually still in their office. And some people who live in a studio flat, so they only have one room, which is their bedroom and their kitchen and their office and everything all jumbled. So it's a good idea to actually put a cover over it at night, is that?
Yeah, so it's not in your face, so that especially if you're sleeping in the same area, because the activity of sleeping is very different from the activity of business. And so we want to be very clear about which activity it is we're doing. We don't want to have them melding into each other, because when we're sleeping we want to be rested and we want to get all those alpha waves going, and we want to make sure that our body's getting what it needs so it can function optimally in the time when we're awake and we are in the office, or we are outside, or we're playing with children, or whatever other activity that might be.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. It's one of the things that goes through my mind, because Feng Shui is sort of very organized, very neat, very tidy. What about people who are naturally completely disorganized, completely cluttered in their lives? And when you were saying there about different tasks in your business and make sure that you're doing specific tasks and things in the right place, what about people who really don't feel comfortable being in an order and being so organized? How can they work with the elements without working against how they feel?
So what we want to create is we want to create spaces that are comfortable for human beings to spend time in. So we want people to be comfortable in their environment. Now, if we've got a lot of old stuff that's past its use-by date, and we're really looking to move our life forward and to have new things come in, and that doesn't have to be objects, it can be in the way of opportunities, then we do need to create a vacuum. So we do need to let go of that which isn't serving us to allow that which can serve us to come into our lives. But we need to be clear about that when we're letting go of stuff as to what we're asking for to come in. Because if we don't do that, we'll get more of what we're letting go of. It'll just recycle and we'll get basically more of the same. But I have a term called creative chaos. So if you're an artist, for example, when you're creating, when you're painting, you've got stuff everywhere, right? Because that's what you need to have in order to actually create and have that artwork working. But you don't want to have your studio like that for 6 months. That's what we call stagnation. So we want to be very clear about the difference between what's creative chaos, which is creating something beautiful, and what's stagnant because it hasn't been touched for 6 months or more. And we want to work with people's natural style. So for example, I'm a piler. So if I've got tasks to do, I like to see them in piles. And I've recently been very fortunate to find a professional organiser that recognised a way that I could be tidy and keep my piles. And one of the things for me has been to get a whole pile of drawers so I can put my little bundles in the drawers rather than having huge bundles sitting on the top of my desk. So I still have a little pile on my desk, but it's nowhere near what I've had over many, many years. So it's really a matter of understanding what your personal organisational style is, because even though it might look like it's a mess and a jumble to other people, you'll be working with your own natural flow as to what your organisational style is in there. And I'm not an expert on that aspect of organisation, but the two main ones I come across are people that like to pile stuff up, and they don't want to file it away in a filing cabinet. Okay, they almost need to see it, but vertical filing cabinets don't work for them. They have to have the piles or be able to put it into a shelf or into a drawer. So it's a matter of educating yourself about how is it that you function and work, and then finding the right storage solutions, or the right, storage is the wrong word, but the right organisational solutions that make it work so that your life is easy.
I like that. And I think that a lot of people will like to hear that, because it isn't about, do it this way and everybody has to be the same. It's about taking what you know, what you like, what you feel comfortable with, and finding the right way to deal with that. Sounds a bit harsh, deal with that, but let it flow, not try and change exactly who you are and what you feel comfortable with.
If you try and change who you are, you're fighting an uphill battle. So you want to work with your natural skills and the talents and how you are. And often you want to start off small, because if you are a very cluttered person and you are looking to change your experience of life, it's actually very hard to let go of stuff to start with, because you're so used to holding onto it very tightly. So start with something small. And there's a really good exercise in a book by a lady called Karen Kingston. She's written a book called Clear Your Clutter with Feng Shui. And one of the things that she suggests is go through each room in your house and mentally decide how much clutter is in each room, right? So if you think about the lounge, there might be 40% there. The dining room, there might be 25. The bathroom, you might think there's 10. Right? Now, what I found when I did that exercise, I wrote down about 60% for my bathroom. Now, when I actually went to go and look at the bathroom, I actually realised there was probably more like 80%, because I had a lot of cosmetics and skincare and stuff that I didn't use, was never going to use, but I brought it and it was sitting in the cupboard because it might come in handy one day. And, we tend to do that and we're never going to use it, but it's clogging up our life. And so when I went to clean that out, I realised I was prepared to let go of 60% of it, but not 80% of it. And I had that recognition at that point in time. So what I did was I dealt with the 60% I was ready to let go of, and I was still emotionally invested in the money I'd invested in the other 20% to get us up to the 80%. And about 6 months later, I wasn't able to clear it all out, but I was able to clear out another significant portion of that, to where today just about everything in my bathroom cupboards I use, it has a specific purpose, will get used. It's not being kept just because it might come in handy one day. So it's a journey. It's not something we can do all at once. And it's not that we're looking to be like Vogue, okay? And people often have this idea with Feng Shui that, it has to be pristine and perfect. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking to create an environment that works for the people living in it. And when I say works for the people living in it, I mean the people that are there, most of the time. So if there's someone that visits occasionally, they might come, once a month or once every 6 months or once every couple of years, we're not looking for the space to work for them. So if we've got a spare room set up for that occasional visitor, and yet we need a space for an office or to do our craft, then it's important that we acknowledge that and say, you know what, I need to change what's in this room so I can still have my visitors, but so I can set it up to put my office in here if that's what we need. Or if we're into craft or design or filming, we can do that activity in that space. So it's working for the people that actually live in the space.
And I think that is a really important part. I know, oops, sorry, Mark. It's all right, you were still on the screen there. I was talking and things were flashing on my screen and I couldn't change the view for people. I think because there are a lot of people who tend to, it's the same with offices, I've seen it, that people set their office up to appeal to their visitors rather than setting their office up to work for them.
Yep. If we go back in time and think about the bank manager, so, 30 years ago or more, when you went to see the bank manager, he would be in his office in the power position, and as the visitor, you would come in and often as not have these tiny little low chairs, and it was very intimidating to go and see the bank manager. Now, we like to think we're a bit more evolved these days and we don't set it up that way, but he was setting it up, and most of the time they were men, so that he was in control of the conversation. And you'll find if you've got meetings with people, so I do a lot of my meetings with people in coffee shops, I do a lot of networking, and I try and get there so that I'm sitting somewhere where I've got my back to a wall behind me and I can see all the entranceways. Now, because I believe in a fairly equal footing and I like to have a nice even relationship, I tend to choose somewhere where my visitor can also be comfortable in that space, because I feel we get more out of people when we do that. So if you're in a business and you've got employees, it's not about setting yourself up in the power position and not them. You want to empower them wherever they're seated so that they can also do their best job. Rather than perhaps the older style of thinking where there was, a bit draconian, and somebody called all the shots and all the little minions jumped to attention.
Yeah, exactly. So it's where if it's a one-man band, it's your home office, you set it up for yourself. If you have employees, then you need to consider the whole working environment and try and make it work for everybody.
Absolutely. And you also want to think about having them work in good relationships with each other. So I did one consultation for a firm where it was two husband and wife in partnership, and they had about 30 employees. Now, one of the women was in a glass office next to where the employees were, and she was in her glass office with her back towards where the employees were. And she was complaining of continually feel like she was being backstabbed. No wonder, right? So all we did with her is we turned her around 90 degrees, not so she was facing them, but so she was side on, and the relationship between her and the employees magically improved. And it's just about those subconscious messages that we're getting or that we're sending out, and how that's having an impact on our self-esteem, us as a person, and how that flows out into our businesses.
Cool. And that glass office, because I know there's lots of glass offices and open offices nowadays. I can imagine if I was sat with my back to the glass wall and everybody's behind it, I would feel very uncomfortable. I tend to be somebody, and I don't know where it's come from, but if I go into a restaurant or socializing, I know instantly where I want to sit. And when I think about it, and as I'm listening to you, it is usually that I want to sit where I am looking out at the people. I don't tend to worry about whether there's a wall behind me, because often if you're out having a meal or something, you don't have walls that you can sit behind or in front of. But I do feel very uncomfortable if I have to take a seat that somehow feels like I don't have a view of everything around me.
Yeah, so instinctively our reptilian brain, fight or flight, is protecting us and putting us in a space where we can see what's coming towards us. So we can, I always talk in Australia, we talk about having put the billy on and have the damper, which is kind of like a scone bread mix. So you can either do that or whether you get the shotgun prepared. And whilst we do that differently today, it's the same theory behind it as to why we act in the ways that we do.
Cool. So you said that there's 4 basics. I think you've gone through 3.
I've got to 3. So the 4th one is we want to have a firm foundation. So the center of that free of clutter. table, we don't want it to be covered with a whole lot of stuff on top of it. We want to have it so it's free flowing. Now ideally it might be something like a corridor or an area where people come together. So if we look back to ancient times again, because obviously Feng Shui is based on ancient principles, look back to ancient times, in the middle of the village there used to be a fire and people would gather around the fire at night. Now the well or the water wasn't in the centre, it was off to the side somewhere. So the fire was that gathering place. And that's basically what we want to have. We want to have somewhere where the energy can flow. So in a small office in a home, it'll be where the desk is most likely, but we want to make sure that it's not cluttered, there's not a lot of stuff on it, that it's clear. So we've got that room to actually be creative, to think, to not just be overwhelmed by all the stuff to do there. If we're looking at a bigger building, whatever's in the centre of the building, we want to create that open space in the centre. Now, I'm not talking about having open offices per se. I'm just talking about having that area where we don't want to put storage in the centre. Right? Putting storage in the centre is a really bad thing to do from a Feng Shui perspective. We want to have it where if we've got stuff there, it's being cycled and being used. So if that's where the stationery cupboard is, for example, great. Just make sure that you're using all the stationery, that you haven't got marketing materials that you're no longer using that have been there for 3 years and they've got a phone number or an address on them, or worse, maybe a testimonial from a client that you've fallen out with. If that's the case, you want to get rid of that stuff. You're not going to use it. And yet we have this thing, well, I've paid good money for it, so we hold on to it. And unfortunately what we're doing is we're not allowing our business to move forward because we're stuck in the past, rather than going, you know what, this isn't serving me, I'm going to create that vacuum so that I can have new business come in that is going to serve me, because I'm going to have new and better paying clients coming in.
Yeah, I mean, everything as I'm listening to you, and it's like, this is not rocket science. This is actually pretty logical stuff, you know, even for people who don't, let's say, believe in Feng Shui. Everything you have said is like basic logic to feel better and to work better.
And Feng Shui is, you know, over the last probably 50 to 100 years, we've got quite desensitized. We're no longer as in tune with nature as we were, and we tend to think that things need to be complicated. So if something's simple and logical and we understand it, we tend to doubt ourselves because we say, oh, it couldn't be that easy, it couldn't be that simple. And in fact, when it gets down to it, particularly in business, it generally is that simple. If you understand it and you can logically put it together, then you're probably on the right track. But if it's convoluted, then probably someone's leading you off the garden path. So, you know, we do want to take it back to those simple principles. I am going to go a bit woo-woo on you for a minute. One of the ways that water represents abundance and opportunity. So ideally we want water on our outside walls coming into the space. So bathrooms, for example, kitchen sinks, we want them on the exterior wall with the water and the faucets flowing into the space, not being in the centre of the area. And one of the things we find is that when we have water, be that bathrooms, kitchen sinks, in the 60s we had atriums, and you know, we used to have sort of pool type areas with plants around it, and you'll notice they're not popular anymore. That's considered to be very destabilizing, and it's a bit like we're looking for a firm foundation, we're looking to be grounded, we're looking for something solid to put under our business to build it on. And when we have water in there, there's two effects that we have. One is that we tend to be like we're stuck in the mud. And I don't think I can do it here. No, I can't from where the cameras are set up. But basically, if you think about having on big, thick, heavy gumboots, and you're trying to take a step, and you've got to actually wrench your leg, you know, you've got to get down there and wrench your leg out of the mud to take the step. So it's like you've got this very sticky mud in there. We don't want that. We also don't want it to be like quicksand, where we've kind of got to move really quickly so that we don't get sucked down in there. And that's what we say is the effect of having water in that centre space. Now, if that is the case, what we want to do is we want to dam that up in some way. And we do that using the earth element. Now, this is not the be-all and end-all to the answer of that, but if that is the case for anyone listening, the easiest and simple thing to get started to change that, because most people in that situation actually haven't generally got the finances available to them to, you know, repaint and really bring the earth element in by painting and putting in new tiles, is to bring in 5 2-inch square yellow tiles. And you might put them, for example, in the cupboard under the sink. But what you're symbolically saying is that I want to ground this area. And as things improve, we want to take it to the next step and we want to say, you know what, I could paint the walls here. And if we were going to do that, then the colours we'd be looking at that would be the earth colours would be yellows, creams, and light to milk chocolate browns. Now, if you're in that situation and you relate to what I've said about either the mud or the quicksand, then there's something you can try. If that doesn't apply to you, then just, you know, put it to one side and forget about it. So we don't want to do things just because Feng Shui says. We want to do them because we've observed that there's something less than excellent in our own experiences. What does Feng Shui have to say about this, and how can I put that, how can I implement that in the space?
I really love the way you just said that. It's not about getting yourself Feng Shui just because. It's about looking at, is life working? Is my business working? Is there a block somewhere? Is there something not right? And if you recognize there is something not right, then look at how you can use the principles in Feng Shui to help change it.
It's one of the things I love about it, because one of the guys that I trained with when I was becoming a practitioner, he had a great life. Everything was going pretty well in his life, and the training had a 6-week break in the middle. And he went home and he went and put all this stuff into place, and his life fell apart. So basically, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Okay? If it's working, go with it. But it's when it's not working and you're looking to have something change, that's the time to say, okay, how can I change this? How can I get a better result? What do I need to do in my environment that I can have a better experience in my business, that my business can do better?
Love it. Now, whoops. I know that because I've read it, I haven't quite got to the end of it yet, but I have read it. You have a book called Good Feng Shui that is not specifically about businesses and offices. It is about overall in your life Feng Shui. Tell people a little bit about your book.
Okay. Well, the book is basically covers the general principles. So we've spoken, I think it's morning over there, it's evening over here. We've spoken today about the classic configuration, which is basically welcoming opportunity and making sure that we have protection and we can secure it when we've got it, making sure our boundaries are in place, making sure we have that firm foundation. And the book goes into that in a bit more detail than we have here and explains to you why that's so important. It also goes through the foundation principles, and which is everything is alive, everything's connected, everything's always changing. It helps you to have a look at your stuff through Feng Shui eyes and see what messages are coming back to you. So when I'm doing a consultation with someone, I'll often say to them, oh, tell me about this. Now, it's not that I have an opinion about the thing I'm asking about. I want to know what that thing is saying to them. And if they start off by saying, oh, that reminds me of my ex-business partner and it's really expensive and we had a falling out and the project didn't go well, that's a big alarm bell, a red flag to me that perhaps that object isn't something that they should have in their environment. And for example, I was working with a company that did training on machinery, so how to drive big machinery, trucks and loaders and graders and all those things. And they'd run, well, they'd booked and paid for a television ad campaign, and then had some posters made from it. Now, the television ad campaign, for whatever reason, never ran, but they'd spent a lot of money putting that together, and what they'd got out of it was these posters. Now, every time the managing director saw the posters, he didn't see great posters. He saw all the money he'd spent on this television advertising campaign that had never gone forward. So that was something that wasn't helpful to him in his space. So we want to look at what the messages are that are coming from that stuff that comes into us. So the book has some of those kinds of examples through it. It talks about the elements very briefly and the bagua. And if anyone's interested, I'm very happy to send a link to a video that shows you how to apply the bagua to your own office or to your own home or to your own workspace. And then in the back of the book was actually some principles. There's about 4 pages of principles specifically related to offices.
And like I say, I have the book, and one of the things I really enjoy with it is the fact that it is not written in hocus pocus language or complex language. It's a very easy to understand and a very clear read, because I've read lots of Feng Shui books and I've got sort of the first few pages and thought, oh, I can't do this, it's far too confusing, as I said at the beginning. With yours, I haven't had that feeling at all. So, you know, that is a good sign that if you want something really clear and simple to read, where you don't have to sit there thinking, oh, I've got to read that again because I really didn't understand that. What do they mean by that? That's not your book at all. Your book is so nice to read.
Thank you, Carol.
You're very welcome. So how can people, if they're interested and they want to learn more from you, how can they actually get your book?
Okay, so the best thing to do would be to go to the website, which is at debrajarvisfengshui.com. The book's for sale on the website, and there's also a free 3-part program that they can sign up for, which gives a bit of the basics from a video series. It's a PowerPoint presentation. Once they've signed up, it gives them access to a page and they can watch each of those videos from there.
Cool. And what I'll do is we'll actually put the links into underneath this event. We'll actually put the links there so that people can just click through and have a look. And I looked at your website as well, and there's lots of really great stuff on there for everybody to look at, as well as the book, and sign up for those videos. So if you could give somebody one tip or an overall thought to leave people with, something that they could maybe do right now or consider right now or think about right now, what would that be?
Okay, so what I would say to anyone that was looking, and once again, remember if this applies to you or not, but if you're looking for your life to be better in some way, most of us have more stuff that has less than excellent memories and feelings associated to it than we can afford to get rid of when we first start down the Feng Shui journey. And it can be quite overwhelming because we suddenly realize that we've got all this stuff and we don't love any of it. So we say we want to have things that we love, that are useful to us now and that are uplifting. So if that's the case, start by bringing in one thing that you do love into the space. And I'm going to tell a really simple story of a young mum, and she was in a situation where she'd left a relationship that was very much less than excellent, and everything she had was either given to her or borrowed. She didn't love any of it. And this particular day she was out at the supermarket buying the groceries, and she was very conscious about her money and her spending, and that she needed to provide for her 2 children. And she doesn't know how she got to this, but she picked up a $2 bag of plastic clothes pegs. And she put that on the checkout, and she actually went through and took those home. And she said that was the day that her life turned around and changed for her. So sometimes it can be overwhelming about what we've got to do. So if it's that overwhelming, start by saying, you know what's one thing I can do to make the space feel better for me? And it might sound really corny to people out there, but for this young girl, and I do this myself, I have to confess, she colour coordinated the pegs on the clothesline, and it just made her feel better. So if you're overwhelmed about, there's so much to do and it's so far to go and you just can't possibly start on the road, find something that you can bring into the space that's going to make you feel better about it. Because when you do that, you'll actually find you're motivated to clean the space around that. So it's kind of like a ripple effect.
Yeah, absolutely. I find that if I buy something that I really like and I put somewhere, I notice that there's clutter and then I just move it out of the way. That's a great tip to leave people with. And I'm just absolutely fascinated, and every time I talk to you I'm fascinated even more, and I hope everybody has got really good value from listening to you. In fact, I know they will have, because you have shared some really great things and you've left people with a great tip. Take it slow, take it steady, but find one thing that is going to bring you pleasure and then start doing other things step by step. Don't just try and do it all at once. So we're going to put the links of how you can find out more about Debra, how you can find her website, her book, and everything else. And I want to say a massive thank you to you for coming and joining me.
It's been my absolute pleasure, Carol. I love to share Feng Shui, and I love every opportunity I can get to actually put that practical message out in the world, to actually help people to live a better life and also to make their businesses work better.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so that's the end of today's. I hope you've had great fun. If you've got any questions, and if you're watching this in replay, put questions in under the event, because Debra and I will circle back and we will come back and have a look and see if there's any questions there, and we will answer them for you. So don't be worried that if you're not watching live right now, you can't put any questions because nobody will answer you. We'll be coming back and having a look. So I hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.